Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to the July edition of the Landlord Lens. And we, as always, are going to be checking out the trending and hot topics for landlords, which we have had a look at via the Property Tribe's website. We have a silo of trending topics, rather like on Twitter. You can see what is really on people's minds. And joining me, as always, is NRLA CEO Ben Beadle. And Ben, we do look forward to these chats, don't we? Because we actually cover a lot of ground, and there sure is a lot of ground to be covered.
Yeah, good afternoon, folks. Absolutely. I mean, we never run out of content, do we? That's the way I would put it. We never have quite enough time to discuss everything. But yeah, loads and loads of issues going on at the moment, not least with Mr. Gove's announcement on Monday, his wide-ranging housing speech, which didn't impact the PRS particularly, but it was good to understand a little bit more about his vision. And of course, you know, rental reform and mortgages, all issues and topics that we're going to be discussing. So let's see.
Indeed. Well, let's start with our number one trending topic of the day, and that is Mr. Gove. And Ben, it's interesting because he's made what we might describe as a few warm noises towards, rowing back a little bit on the pledge for net zero and EPC and MEES and so on. And it's very interesting that he's started making these kind of noises. Why do you think that is?
Well, I put it entirely down to NRLA lobbying, Vanessa, to be honest with you. No, jokes aside, although, I do feel we've had an influence there. I mean, I was reflecting on this point earlier, actually, because this time last year, or roughly, I was involved in the Tory party conference, and, Gove was speaking in my view, very divisively about the role of landlords. Well, dial forward to today, and actually the language is much more different, much different. And so, whilst he will talk about rogue landlords, he will always do that in the context of the overwhelming majority being responsible and decent and all of that stuff. And that's great. There will be people out there that say, well, that's, we need to see some actions off the back of that. And that's right. But actually what he said on Monday, a speech that I was at and able to ask him about, and in the Telegraph article over the weekend, is something that we've been banging on about, not just on the Landlord Lens, but through NRLA lobbying for many, many months, which is that these things are dead in the water in terms of MEES. They are not realistic. And that's not to paint landlords as being sort of, climate change deniers. This is about saying, well, we want to help government meet its aspirations, but crikey, give us a fair lead in and tell us what the rules of the game are, and let's have carrot and stick in equal measure. And that was a point, as you know, I had a one-on-one meeting with Mr. Gove a couple of months or so ago. That's what he told me then. And I'm absolutely delighted that he has come out and said this publicly now. It's a big movement. If I was to be critical, I would have liked it to have been sooner, because I think, as I've said on this show before, I think whilst landlords will have concerns about renters reform, they will be able to deal with renters reform. But energy changes, if your property's an E, you've got no cavity wall, and you're in a conservation area or whatever, well, you're going to be stuffed, frankly. And that cap is the 10K cap that is proposed is simply a case of whether it's viable to stay in the sector or not. So I would have liked to have seen that mood music played out a little bit earlier, but, better late than never.
But do we know where we stand now with, rental properties having to be upgraded to C or above to be let? Do we actually have a date?
No.
Or is there just more confusion? Or should landlords breathe a slight sigh of relief that it may not come for many, many years?
So what I think is a couple of things. I think that, if this stuff is going to come in. it will come in one way, shape, or form. Michael has said that, but what we would like to see now is that sort of aspiration, the warm words, if you will, translate into a very clear policy statement that says, look, folks, we want you to help us on this journey, but we know we need to give you more time, and we need to also give you some incentives, and we also need to do something about this cap and bring it down, link it to have it tapered, linked to average rents in the area, and we also need to encourage you to make upgrades at the right time. And as I said to Michael Gove and Lord Callanan, who I met when we were together at the Landlord Investment Show, this is about nudge behavior. Well, if I need to change my boiler, I should be in a better position tax-wise if I move to a more energy efficient model than if I just chose to replace my combi like for like. And at the moment, you're penalised through the tax system if you choose to make an upgrade. Well, that seems to me to be a really simple fix. If you want to encourage good behaviour, let's encourage the right sort of behaviour financially rather than the behaviour that we don't want to see. Otherwise, everyone will go out and buy spare parts for their trusty Potterton or whatever. So those are the sorts of things that we say need to happen next. And based on the conversation I had with Lord Callanan, although we're expecting a formal response to the consultation by the end of the year, we do hope to get a statement when people come back from recess, because I do think we need clarity. And that's the thing, people have seen these announcements, got absolutely spooked by them, made particular decisions about their portfolios, but they haven't actually come in yet. And so clarity, giving the industry clarity and confidence is what must happen next. And that's what we'll be pushing Michael Gove and Lord Callanan for.
Well, I wholeheartedly concur. I think we can see that there is this direction of travel towards energy efficiency. And I think then the wider picture is that if you are having to replace a boiler, why not put in an A+ rated boiler? Because it's going to reduce your tenants' utility bills, or certainly if it's an HMO, potentially your own bills. It's future-proofing your property, and there's so many schemes now where you can just pay on a monthly basis, so there's no massive capital outlay if you don't want to do that. And not only that, lenders, if you are certainly a portfolio landlord with 4 or more properties, they are looking across your entire portfolio at your EPC ratings, and they're also introducing green products with discounted rates. So we can definitely see that this direction of travel is happening. And
yes.
Whatever date the government comes up with to implement this, landlords should not be burying their heads in the sand and think, I'll just wait until the actual date is announced. I think you're right. Doing it gradually as well, particularly if you have a large number of properties, I think is just common sense.
I 100% agree. And, I really feel that this sort of message in terms of the policy direction is really getting through. We've seen this morning the Prime Minister himself commenting on overburdening landlords on the direction of travel, and making sure that, again, making warm noises about the lead-in period for some of this stuff. But as I say, and as you say, this is about nudging people to do the right sorts of things. And as business owners, looking into the future and say, well, this is going to come, whether it's 2025 or 2026 or 2028 or whatever it happens to be, it will be coming in. And what you want to do is to kind of cushion yourself against a big shock. But what I would like government to see is to have what I don't want to do is to advise people to go out and do X, Y, and Z, and then the whole EPC ratings, gets changed, the algorithm changes, and the basis upon which you've made that investment makes effectively your investment redundant. Well, we can't have that, and that's why we do need to have very, very clear rules so that everybody knows what the rules are, everybody can work to them, and that's got to be in the interest of both landlord and the renter, for sure.
Indeed. I just wanted to touch a little bit more on, you've mentioned how the rhetoric has changed in recent times, and it's become more understanding of landlord issues. Well, let's hope that this is a trend that continues, and let's hope that the other industry stakeholders, like the shelter, generation rent, and the renters unions and so on, let's hope that they start to appreciate that responsible landlords have a very important part to play. So much of what I see is just tarring landlords with the same brush. And just as there aren't, all tenants aren't bad, all landlords aren't bad. And, we want the responsible landlords to be the landlords that are, having their voices heard. Because obviously responsible landlords give tenants a much better experience of private renting. So have you seen any other change of direction in rhetoric from any other industry stakeholders?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've certainly seen it from the ministerial team and in the, the people that are directly working alongside some of this stuff. And we saw a little bit at the select committee as well. The Levelling Up Select Committee that I was very fortuitous to very pleased to be invited to give a voice to the responsible majority. Yeah, at the end of the day, I was able to call out some of this nonsense, Vanessa, as you heard, because and I know we'll get onto Section 21 and homelessness a bit later, but seriously, Section 21 is not the biggest cause of homelessness. In 2 years' time, it will be Section 8. Jesus, we've got to have a better standard of debate, and we need to phase out these, frankly, outdated ideology that somehow owning more than one property makes you, worse than a piece of crap on your shoe. We need the private rented sector, and I've been really pleased to see ministers and Michael Gove again on Monday. Based on a leading question from yours truly, obviously, but back the private rented sector, reiterate that responsible landlords have a role, and that the private rented sector is a force for good. And I think there's a massive opportunity for landlords to be able to demonstrate some of this stuff. But my friends at Shelter and elsewhere need to recognise that you can regulate the pants off something if you want, but if the homes aren't there at the end of the day, that's a slightly hollow victory as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's that message that's getting through. We need supply.
Well, definitely, and not to mention lack of enforcement as well. If you can have all the regulation in the world, but if it's not enforced, the rogues
pointless.
They're going to find their way through.
100%.
So yeah, we've got a question from David Caswell. He says, does Mr. Gove realise that the only way we can pay for reforms and upgrades is to put up the rents?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what Mr. Gove would say is that the impact assessment that they have done reckons it will only add 10 quid a year to the average property. I would take some issue with that, but I think at a headline level, David, the more you regulate something, the more difficult you make it. Somebody has to pay for that regulation somewhere. Invariably it will be through the rents, as far as the market can bear rent increases, because we're already seeing quite high ones at the moment. So it's certainly something to be mindful of, but I suspect the bigger issue for rent setting will be around those coming off fixed rate mortgages and how they cope thereafter, rather than rental reform.
Well, I'll just take this opportunity to let everybody know that this is an interactive live webinar. We're not a recording, we are live. I'm at home in Guildford. Ben is up at the NRLA head office in Sale. And if you want to add your question, you're very welcome to use the Q&A box, and we will pick up as many questions as we can along the way, and maybe a couple at the end as well if we have time. We are going to finish a little bit earlier today because, Ben, you have got another media appearance, haven't you?
Yes, so I will be on Moneybox Live from 3 o'clock, but joining a little bit beforehand, where going to be dealing with, I'm sure, multiple tales of woes around rents going up and Section 21 and so forth. And I'm on with I think the London Renters Union and Rightmove and a housing lawyer as well. So it'd be a good opportunity to be able to set the record straight on a number of areas, no doubt.
Awesome. Well, let's move on to our next topic, which kind of segues nicely from what we've been talking about anyway. And Mr. Gove, it is the Renters Reform Bill. Still a lot of confusion about it. Will it actually come in this Parliament? Are there going to be further changes to it? Again, Ben, it's creating uncertainty, and the noise around it, certainly from my perspective, and I'm on the social web every day, it does seem to have kind of decreased a little bit. What's your view today as we speak about what's happening with the Renters Reform Bill?
Well, Parliament is now in recess. Nothing will happen with it over the summer. Parliament will come back in September. It will be scheduled for a second reading at some point. We think it will be September. We think it will get a second reading in September, but there's a lot to play out between now and then. I think whatever way the cookie crumbles in terms of when that second reading arises, it's important for me to get across that we're not sat around waiting for that second reading. We're talking to the people that matter around some changes that we want to see, not least around students. And we've had a meeting with officials as recently as yesterday on that matter, because we want concessions. I don't like the term concession. I think it's common sense when it comes to that particular demographic, but in political circles, they would see it as a concession. And we want to also understand a bit more around court reform and what that looks like. Because as you know, Vanessa, almost 3/4 of NRLA members can envisage a world without Section 21, providing the alternative works. I don't have a great deal of confidence at the moment, and I said this at the Select Committee a couple of weeks or so ago. We need to see a clear plan when it comes to court reform. And, Mr. Gove has told me and said publicly that he won't get rid of Section 21 until the courts are in a position to be able to deal with things. You read into that whatever you like in terms of timeframes, but and whether parliamentary time will allow all of these things to happen. But I think what I am prepared to say on this is that there isn't a lot of time to get quite a lot of stuff done.
I agree. Ben, there's a couple of very nice comments for you. Leslie Hall and Lucy Fizarova have both said that they've seen you in action at the Select Committee and that you did a great job, and they want to thank you for all your hard work. So that's lovely to see. Indeed. That's
really, really kind. And more planned of the same. So we keep up the fight, but thank you for those comments.
John Taylor's got a question. He said some tenants in shared HMOs prefer a fixed term tenancy because it guarantees that they can stay in the property for the length of time that they want to stay there. I think there's some spelling mistakes here. But not if he dies or decides to sell the property after Section 21 is removed. I think that there's quite a lot of concern about this. I see this echoed across a lot of social media for landlords.
Well, I mean, there is, and what we would like to see. So the fixed term is being abolished; it's being replaced, as it were, by an ongoing periodic tenancy that can only be ended with a legitimate reason. I'm quite pleased with the legitimate reasons that are set out because they give the landlords the opportunity to move back in, move their family back in, sell the property, take action against antisocial behaviour, rent arrears, and a whole raft of other things. I think that's workable. I have a big question mark over the court system, but that's something else. So tenants will still have the security because landlords won't be able to evict them without a legitimate reason to do so. But the issue for me is you can't give a notice to sell within the first 4 months of the tenancy or a notice to move back in. And I say that particularly the HMO market, where you might have higher churn. I say a couple of things. One, we don't want this to become an Airbnb light, as I've said at the select committee. And two, if this bill is about a fair private rented sector, then it would seem to me that having an equivalent moratorium period that works both ways, where notice cannot be given within the first 6 months, would be a very fair and proportionate thing to do to safeguard against turning it into short lets and to safeguard against landlords' costs around setting up a tenancy, because we all know that's where a significant amount of cost comes in, whilst protecting the ethos of the bill, which is greater security for renters and greater mobility, but on their terms. So that's one of the things that we are pushing for at the moment. Of course, the person raising the question is absolutely right. Landlords will still be able to sell. And so it's really, really important that this bill isn't seen as a panacea for curing every woe in the sector. I did liken it to rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, because the biggest issues we see are taxation and mortgages. If you haven't got a going concern, you're going to sell, and the Renters Reform Bill will not prevent you from doing that, nor should it.
Well, we're also already hearing stories, Ben, of unscrupulous landlords not issuing ASTs and saying that tenants are just short-term lets to get round so much of the regulation. And I wonder what can be done to stop those kind of bad practices.
Yeah, well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't endorse that approach, Vanessa. I think it is the reason why we need to make sure that the Renters Reform Bill works for the responsible majority. You've got to have confidence in the system that you're operating in. A failure to do so will have a far-reaching and detrimental impact on the very people you purport to be protecting. From some of this stuff, the renters. And, there's an article out today around, 20 viewings per property in terms of the supply and demand imbalance. We're starting to see some of this stuff. We're starting to see some chickens come home to roost. And it's really, really important that government gets the balance right between safeguarding renters' interests, but also encouraging landlords and property owners to bring their properties to the market. There is no shame in doing that, and there is no shame in making a sustainable profit off the back of that, providing you treat your tenants fairly and do all of the things that are legally required of you in terms of standards and safety. And that's why, I was very pleased to see Michael Gove back the private rented sector and the role that the private rented sector has and brings wider benefits. It's really, really important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a strong case for educating tenants as well, to help them understand if they might be letting from a rogue or even criminal landlord, and what they can do about that. Because I think a lot in any space, a rogue will prey on a vulnerable person who may have less knowledge of them, less knowledge of their rights. And we do see this happening, unfortunately. So I think tenant awareness is very important as well.
I agree with that, Vanessa. And I think that's why I'm quite pleased to see the property portal, because I do think the property portal done right will be a very helpful tool for a couple of areas. One, to enable good and responsible landlords to show that they're letting compliant properties. We all serve our required certifications up front, but let's, stick it on the portal, let people see it. I've got nothing to hide. I do that anyway. And the education side is engaging with tenants to say, perhaps through the portals, that, this property does have a gas safety, it does have an EPC, it does have all of those, a license if that's what it needs. And so it's empowering the consumer through data to make really informed decisions. And it's also a third win here. It's also enabling our local authorities with very stretched resources to focus on the criminal minority rather than bugger about chasing after good landlords and making their life a misery. Because there's nothing that irritates me more than some of the selective licensing schemes that I've seen, spoken about this week. Well, we've got a property portal coming. You don't need both. And that's a classic example of how you frankly piss people off through excessive regulation. And I was very pleased to make that point on BBC West Midlands Today, only yesterday evening. I didn't curse quite as much as I did just then, but I feel I'm in friendly company, but that's how I feel about it.
Oh, go Ben, that's what I say. We've got 2 questions here related to a possible Labour government, which is looking increasingly likely. Catherine Vitellio would like to know what your feelings are about Labour's view of the private rented sector. And Dee Simpson would like to know if you've actually had any contact with the opposition party and, if you've had any constructive talks with them.
100%, and they're great questions. And as an association, whilst you see us very visible dealing with the government of the day, we're operating on 2 fronts. We have to be in front of moderate and even not so moderate Labour MPs championing the sector and talking up what we're doing and how we're doing it. I met Lisa Nandy at the Labour Party conference last year. We've had several conversations with her senior team. I've met, I can't remember his name now, but he's leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council, and he's been tasked with writing their rented housing strategy. But we know what the headlines are from last year's conference. Labour wants to return social housing to the second largest form of tenure. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing if they, unless they do it to the detriment of the private rented sector. If they want to embark on a social house building campaign, well, that's fine. We've got 1.2 million people on social housing waiting lists. That's fine. If they want to make the environment so punishingly bad that PRS properties get acquired by local authorities, well, that would be a disaster, and it would also not solve the substantive problem of increasing the number of homes. It just moves it from one tenure to another. So I think with all of these things, loads and loads of work going on behind the scenes. You would have seen me meet Clive Betts, Labour MP, very big on housing. Stephen Timms, also Labour MP, big on housing and chair of the DWP Select Committee. Lots of other meetings that go on as we start to sort of, gear up towards a general election and position the responsible landlord in the best possible light. But it is easy to call for these things when you're in opposition. And so, what we hope is that whatever ideologies get floated, that they're met with a barrage of pragmatism should the need arise, and that's where we come in.
Excellent. Well, Kerry Brown says, thank you, Ben, for being so visual in the media over the last few months. It's starting to feel like landlords are being heard and your work is much appreciated. So thank you, Kerry. Now let's move on to our 3rd topic. I'm just mindful of the time. Base rate rises, Ben. A lot of questions in the chat. Landlords on SVRs struggling, clinging on with their fingernails. There's certainly, from what we've seen on Property Tribes, first of all, you're not alone. There are a lot of landlords facing this, where they've come off a fixed rate, they've gone on to an SVR, and it's just gone through the roof. I think there's been 13 base rate rises over the recent times. Many landlords will have only experienced the very low rates. Some of us older ones who've been around longer, we have been through this before. But, it's very challenging for these landlords on SVRs because their options, unfortunately, are limited. And yes, you could potentially put up the rent if you have been below market rent and it's not too big a jump to jump up to market rent, but still that may not give you positive net cash flow at the end of the month, or the other option, which I think some landlords are doing, are selling. I'm actually selling a 1-bed flat in London that is on an SVR. I can't remortgage it. for various reasons, which I won't bore you with. But I have managed to get a sale for it, but quite a bit below what I was hoping. So Ben, you know, landlords clinging on. Have you got any wise words for them?
Well, it's tricky because, I mean, there aren't so many solutions, Vanessa, as you observe. Yeah, and this is the point we've been making in the media. You know, we're being put in the position of either having to jack the rent up or to exit the market. There isn't really, other than sucking up the costs, which landlords now can't afford to do for the most part. A report by Savills out last week shows that landlords are making their lowest margins since 2007. And so, yeah, what we have to do is to separate rent increase or rent increases from greed. Actually, you know, this isn't greedy landlords raising their rents just because they can. Actually, this is landlords that are looking at their properties. They're looking at and working out that they need to take certain steps to keep them a going concern. Well, that's a perfectly legitimate business reason to do it. But as you say, the market will only bear so much. And so, punishing rent increases on existing tenants is really putting landlords between a rock and a hard place. And what we don't want to see is sort of, £500-600 rent increases a month, because, there are very few people, if you were on the receiving end of your mortgage going up by such a significant amount, it would be very difficult to accommodate. And therein lay the issue, which is why, we are between a rock and a hard place. In my own situation, I have a remortgage coming up in November, and I will be going from 3.86, it's quite a big HMO, to I think 6.65. So I can remortgage it, but on just a product switch, which I'm doing for the minimum 2 years, and hopefully it'll all blow over. Now, I have reset the rent as it's come to the market. It's a student property, rather than resetting midway on an existing tenant like a lot of landlords do. But it is tricky. It is very tricky, and there will be a lot of similar conversations going on up and down the country between landlords and tenants, and that's being borne out by the ONS figures that show rents on average are increasing by I think 5.1%. I mean, still well below all measures of inflation, but it does show you some of the difficulties that are out there. But it's markets that set the rent, and you may well want to put your rent up £600 a month, but the market won't allow it. It's as simple as that.
Well, there is a third potential option, and that is to change from single occupancy buy-to-let to a holiday let. Then you move away from the worries of Section 24, all the regulation and legislation around private landlords and tenants. But Ben, this may not work for everybody, and it's taking more properties away from the sector. And then it could be starting to oversaturate in short-term lets. And, I think that this is a real, problem that's being caused by landlords trying to find alternative solutions and moving to short-term lettings. That becomes oversaturated, and obviously with a buy-to-let mortgage you couldn't undertake that activity legitimately anyway. So as you say, I think the choices for landlords are fairly narrow. We did just want to mention one of the NRLA and indeed Property Tribes partners, which is MoveWise. They will help you sell a tenanted property, and I think we're quite in favour of this, Ben, because it means that you don't have to issue a Section 21 notice. You can have rent up to the day of completion of the sale. The new landlord earns rent from day of completion of the sale, and the tenant remains in their home. And I think this is a very favourable way to do it. And if you approach a regular high street agent, from my own experience and what I've heard from other landlords, they will always say, oh, you must have a vacant possession. Well, no, you can still sell a property via MoveWise to another investor and still get, a fair price for it. And I think landlords should, what I want to really say, Ben, is landlords should explore all the options open to them before making a decision.
100%. I mean, who doesn't want to get rent right the way up to completion? And I think it's a very practical solution that deals with Section 21 in a very nice way, i.e., you don't need to issue it. And it means that, the incoming landlord gets a going concern from day one. So there's a lot of benefit there. And I would suggest that those that are in that bracket of thinking of selling, seriously consider the MoveWise option, because it's a really good solution for everybody potentially.
Just one little tip I wanted to share was I am remortgaging a 4-bed house in Basingstoke that is on an SVR, and I have kept the rent low for many years because the tenants, it's a family there, and it was trugging along quite nicely, but because the rent is so low, we can't actually make it stack up for a remortgage, just even a like-for-like remortgage, based on the rental income. Now, this stopped me doing anything, but I had a chat to my broker and he said there are a couple of lenders that will lend on the market rent, not the actual rent that you're receiving. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there for our viewers that, it's always worth having a conversation with a broker, because there's new products coming out all the time. I've heard today that mortgage businesses have dropped dramatically in the volume of work they're doing, and lenders are going to come out with more competitive and innovative products. We have heard that swap rates are dropping this week, which is good news and healthy for us. So we want to urge everybody, Ben, to keep in touch with your support team, particularly your broker, if you're struggling with an SVR.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we work with an organisation called 3MC. You can find the details on the NRLA site, but certainly one of the benefits of being in touch with a broker like 3MC is that although I've committed to a product swap in November, I can change my mind if there's a more preferential deal that happens. And ever the optimist, there's 3 months for the outside world to improve, and maybe I might get a better deal. So I think keep working with the experts, keeping your ear to the ground, and make sure they're working in your interest is a good way to go, and a very practical way of trying to get the best deal you can.
Excellent. Brian had a good question on this topic of interest rates. He has 4 coming out of a 2-year fixed, and they have jumped up significantly. He's not sure what to do, whether to go for a 2-year or a 5-year fixed, or just go for a tracker. And it's a hard one to call, Brian. My opinion is that look at the arrangement fees for some of these mortgages. They are absolutely massive. And if you take out a 2-year fix where the arrangement fee could be 3,000 to 5,000, and it's the same for a 5-year fixed, and you wanted certainty, I've gone for 5-year for all of mine, to be honest, because I just want to know where I stand. But I would also just reiterate what we said earlier about speaking to your broker. There are some new products coming out. There was one that came out a few weeks ago, and I think I've got this right, but forgive me if I haven't, that it was a 1-year fix with the possibility to change after 1 year. So, that there are products out there that could potentially help you survive this. And again, you must speak to your broker. They are worth their weight in gold in helping you get through this. Okay, excellent. Sue says she's got a similar situation to me, Sue Case. She says, thank you for sharing, as I can't raise the rent too high because it's not fair. It's a single great tenant. Thank you to both of you for your hard work. And she agrees with Ben's previous comments, and she really does feel that you and the team are gaining good traction with the government. So thank you for your feedback, Sue. That's fantastic. Okay, you just, I think we just got another couple of minutes for one quick topic, or do you want to go to questions now, Ben, or should
you go for it. I'm in your hands.
Well, we kind of touched on it earlier, but it's kind of taking us first full circle, actually, because today we've had the announcement that there is record homelessness in England.
Oh, yes.
It's at an all-time high, and the latest statistics suggest that there are circa 80,000 households homeless between January and March this year. These are absolutely shocking figures, Ben. And, you know, I'll pick up on something you said earlier. To my mind, this is very strong evidence of chickens coming home to roost. When is a big penny going to drop?
Well, I mean, in some ways, it's helpful, you know, to the arguments that we will be continuing to make. I mean, it feels like the government must be hemorrhaging money on temporary accommodation. Surely it would be better to back a sector that's going to be very heavily regulated through the Renters Reform Bill. Surely it would be better to back that than to pay people to live in hotels or B&Bs or, you know, somewhere like that. To me, you know, we can't pinpoint everything to all of the decisions that have been taken previously, but you know, we'll have a good go, because I think you know, this is indicative of the punishing regime that the private rented sector has been put through. And it surely can't be government position that you'd much rather have people in temporary accommodation than in the private rented sector. And that's why, you know, there's a couple of comments on there about the select committee and Clive Betts giving shelter a very, very hard time. Is this what you want? Is this what you want? Because shelter at the select committee was saying, well, do you know what? Those landlords that don't go on to sell or do say they move back in and change their mind, 3 months isn't long enough. We want you to keep your property empty for a year. So let me just think through the logic here. A housing charity that houses nobody doesn't want anybody else to house the very people they look after. Well, that to me is absolutely barking mad, and I'm glad that Clive Betts called it out for what it was. This is what we will continue to see if we adopt ideological nonsense as has been put forward. We have a healthy private rented sector. There's steps that we need to take to make it better, and you know, we work holistically across the sector to make sure, because we, you know, there's lots of comments on here. I can't put my rent up because, you know, I feel really bad for my tenant and my tenant's not going to be able to afford it. Well, we give a stuff about the people that we're looking after, right? And so, you know, we have to remember that we can't tarnish everybody with the same brush, and that's why it's important that landlords have confidence about rental reform. It's why we should reduce the cost base for landlords, particularly in light of the mortgage costs, because if you have a mortgage, you'll be paying an extra 20% tax on top of that, thanks to Section 24. And so we have the perfect storm that's as landlords consider their investments leave the sector, that's really not helping the substantive issue of keeping people in their homes. And these disgraceful figures absolutely bear that out.
And do you know what, Ben? We're seeing more and more local authorities coming out with landlord incentives to get hold of properties, and their language and rhetoric towards landlords is very different to central government, because they're right at the coalface with massive housing waiting lists and not able to discharge their housing obligations into the private rented sector because there's not enough landlords. And you know, I've kept a little thread on Property Tribes going. Every time I see a local authority offering landlord incentives, or what I call a golden hello, some are offering up to £2,500 cash incentive to hand over a property. I update this thread, and it's just going up through the months as more and more local authorities struggle. So it really is a serious problem. And as you've said so many times, and you're absolutely on point, Rome is burning. And something urgent needs to be done, not something that's a long-term solution. So we're going to be talking about this for months to come, I think, Ben. I just wanted to share some wise words from Paul Munns. He says selling is a permanent position to take. Yes, yep, you're absolutely 100%. Right, Paul. He says, my feeling is that landlords who can ride this current state out will be well placed to make capital increases in the future. I do agree with you, Paul. I'm extremely loath to sell any of my properties because I remember what it took to acquire them in the first place. And with current mortgage products and the way deals are stacking up, it won't be a 25% deposit. It will actually be a 35 or 45% deposit. So yeah, I hear what you say. I think to summarize, we would say explore all of your options that we've touched on today. And, you know, if you do decide to sell, then yes, be aware that, you know, you could struggle to get a property in the future if you know, if we're still in these doldrums. So I tend to try and hang on to mine, but this particular one I am selling, it is something that I'm not going to keep, and I'm going to reinvest the capital gains from it because it's a flat in London that's done very well. I shall reinvest it into something that does better for me. Okay, let me just see if there's anything else we want to say. Oh, one final thing. This is just me. I've had a very nice comment from Ian Gayanus. He says, thank you both for all the great work you do within the private rented sector. He said, I particularly wish to thank Vanessa for all, I want to wish her all the best for her defamation court case. And he says, I can't imagine how you are doing, but he wishes me every success. That's very much appreciated, Jen. I just wanted to use that just to say to everybody that the FCA have launched a consultation concerning financial promotions on social media. And Ben, I know that you're happy for me to mention this because we want responsible landlords to be seen on social media. We don't want all this get rich quick, you can be a millionaire in a year with no money, because that just plays into the anti-landlord rhetoric. And some of these financial promotions that we see on YouTube adverts and YouTube videos, they are very dangerous to consumers.
You're absolutely right, Vanessa. I mean, these people do a great disservice to our industry. And as we have said, you know, before, if it feels too good to be true, it probably is. And this sort of training doesn't need to be expensive. There are a whole range of decent providers, ourselves included, where you can be trained on a whole range of different topics if that's what you desire, for, you know, under 100 quid. So we must take the opportunity to get our own house in order on some of this stuff, and it is a part of the sector that's a bit grubby, to be honest with you. And I'm going to get my marigolds on and respond to the consultation, and I would urge everybody else to.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. So it is the FCA financial promotions on social media. The consultation, if you put that into Google, you should find it. Otherwise, there is a link on Property Tribes, and we will put one below this video as well. We would love as many of you as possible to take part in that and just have your voice heard, because consultations are all about change, aren't they, Ben? And that's what we've seen through the PRS consultations as well. They can facilitate change.
They can, absolutely. And, you know, there's no point adopting the stance that your voice will not be able to influence the direction of travel and not do anything. Otherwise, you know, that will be the inevitable outcome. So I would urge everybody to get involved in this consultation and others as they arise. And also linked to that, make sure that you do use the summer to lobby your MP on rental reform, on energy. You can find a Right to My MP section on the NRLA website, top and tail it, and make sure that your MP makes representations to the Secretary of State on your behalf on the issues that matter to you. For the most part, NRLA members are concerned about court reform, students, the moratorium period, a few other things that now escape me, but a dozen or so very, very key items on the working of the sector. And if we don't point them out and add extra voices to that argument, then we won't win. So do please top up your TAN, but write to your MP as well.
Hear, hear. Well, I'm going to end on a very positive note. Leslie Hall says, after hearing Ben at the Select Committee and the Select Committee's response, I feel more positive on the private rented sector than I have done for a long time. And Ben, I think it's lovely to end on such a positive note, because there are challenges, there are struggles for landlords, but it is the educated landlord that will survive and thrive. And we as a community, if we all pull together, make sure our responsible landlord voices are heard, that's going to help all of us, the entire community. So whilst it is challenging, there are positives and there will be opportunities. And if you're struggling, reach out. There's many places like Property Tribes, like the NRLA forums, where you can get support and help. So Ben, I feel actually positive, more uplifted after this Landlord Lens. So thank you very much for your contributions and your insights. As always, it's so interesting to hear, from actually sitting at the tables and the meetings that you do attend. I'm sure you've got loads more in the pipeline, have you?
Of course we have, and we will be creating new ones, because it's so important, Vanessa, to use the media appearances that we've had and the exposure that we've had to further the discussion and argument about what a great sector this is, what great work the responsible landlords of this sector are doing, and what ideas we've got to clean up the sector and improve it for the benefit of everybody within it. And that's why it's so important that Michael Gove brings responsible landlords along with him on this journey, and why if Labour are waiting in the wings, they must do the same. And that's our job.
Awesome. Well, don't go changing, Ben. You've done some brilliant work recently, and thank you for today. We've had over 35 questions today. Sorry we couldn't get to all of them. We really do appreciate you asking them and your engagement with us on this webinar. And we'll be back with another edition of the Landlord Lens in a couple of months' time. But for now, thank you very much for being part of this one. And Ben and I will hopefully see you somewhere down the property trail over the summer. But for now, goodbye.